G'day everyone and welcome back. This week we're going to be turning this into this. Let's get right into it. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me for this Wargaming Terrain tutorial. Now this may be the unsafest video you watch on YouTube today. Now that's just basically because of the tools I'm using. Ideally for cutting foam you want to get yourself a hot wire foam cutter. But if you've been following my channel for any length of time, you would know by now that probably the only way I'm going to get my hands on one of those is if I steal it. So what I've got today is this long-bladed Stanley knife. Certainly not the best tool for the job, but if you take your time, do it slowly, and get whatever safety equipment you can get your hands on, you should be able to get through this pretty easily. Now I have just leveraged that piece of foam up off the table just so the offcut is sitting a little bit above the tabletop. This just reduces the resistance of the blade as you cut through, especially as you get deeper and deeper through the foam here. So if you can do that, do that. Now this is the foam I'm using, multi-use foam board. It's an high density insulation foam, I believe. Now this comes to me thanks to the support of my Patreon supporters this week. I will give a shout out to them later on in the video and also give you a quick tour of my studio such as it is, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Now the only measurements I'm doing on this today are the square size of the block I'm using, which in this case is about 8.5 centimeters by 8.5 centimeters. You can make these to any size you like. The larger they are, the harder they'll be to cut with this blade. Now you'll see there I just cut some beveled edges across the two sides and the front of the top of this building, just to give it a bit more of a realistic look. And here I'm just marking up the portal for the front, so you'll notice we're going to dig out this section of the emplacement very shortly. So you do want to try and make these cuts slowly and smoothly and mark them out first. With this type of blade you'll notice that it does tend to bend as you push through into the foam, so again just try to mark it out and take it as slow as you possibly can as you go through this. Now you see there I'm wearing a glove. This is actually a glove I got a very long time ago for wood carving. This is just to help me help prevent me from cutting off a finger as I go through here with this blade, because it is a new blade, it is very sharp, and I do recommend a new sharp blade for this process when you do it. So once we've got those cuts made, what we're going to do is dig out this section of the foam block that we've got. I find the best way to start this is with a pen or a pencil, and then you can get your ruler to get those deeper sections of foam out if your pen doesn't fit all the way through. Now the back of this cut doesn't necessarily need to be too flat or straight. It's not going to be seen very much, so yeah, just don't worry too much about the inside of the building at this stage. Here I'm just going to cut off cut off the two front corners just at a 45. Again, this just gives it a little bit more of a realistic look, a bit more detail on the building. And I'm just going to bevel out a couple of these top edges here just at the front, again just for realism of this building. Now once we've got that cut out, honestly you could just start adding in some details and paint it up and throw it on the tabletop and it would probably look fine. Obviously I like to add in a few more details if I can, so what I'm going to do here is just cut out this bottom section of the inside of the building. Now when you're doing these cuts they don't need to be accurate at all, we just want to get a small section of this cut out first so that we can then trim out to the right dimensions that we want and get those walls on the outside there a little bit thinner. So again, just be very careful not to cut all the way through your block of foam at this point. You just want to cut through that bottom section. And once you've got those cuts all the way through you should be able to pop that out pretty easily. So once we've got that out you can then start, like I said, trimming back those walls to make them a little bit thinner at the front and the sides. Here I'm just going to use a bit of a wedge just in that gap. This is just a piece we popped out earlier. This just stops the foam from bending. Because it is a high density foam, it doesn't want to bend too much. It will tend to snap if you put too much pressure on it or try to bend it in any way. So using one of those wedges really helps to kind of keep it steady while you make these cuts. Now once we've got that cut, I'm going to actually put a bit of a doorway or an entranceway onto the back of this building. I have measured to the center of the building just so that this doorway is square to the rest of it. All I've done is just gouge in there about 1/4 of an inch just to pop out that rectangular section for the doorway. Now I will be covering this up with the cereal box cardboard door, as you'll see soon. This is same process I used in the shipping containers, so I'll put a link to that video when we get up to the doorway, so if you are wanting to make one yourself, you'll have the link to that video. Now I've just added some chips out of the concrete outer surface of this building for the details. Before I put in the cracks and the rest of the detail, I am just going to give this a quick sanding with some really fine grit sandpaper. Now this is not to shape the building at all, this is just to get a bit more of consistency across all the textures across the different sides of these cuts. So with this foam you will notice the top and bottom are quite smooth and slick. It really doesn't take paint too well, so you do want to, if you can, give it a little bit of a scraping over with some fine grit sandpaper just to make all the sides and the top a little bit more uniform. Now there I just added some seams into the concrete, and here I'm going through some cracks as well. I will put a link to the video for the concrete barriers which goes into that a little bit more detail. So here you can see the buildings coming together quite nicely. Again, you could probably stop at this stage and paint it up and throw it on the table, and that's definitely a usable piece of terrain, but I do want to add some more details to finish this project off. So I found this small scrap of foam board in my cupboard. Now I was going to throw this away, but I'm glad I didn't, because this turned out to be perfect size just to cover the base of this building. Now what this is going to do is actually just lift it a little bit up higher off the table to give it a little bit more height, and it's also going to give me an edge around the sides and front there to add some rocks and grass and extra details, as you'll see in a second. Now I have beveled those edges down a little bit just so that they run into the tabletop a little bit nicer, and what I've done there is just add some fine sand and also some foam chips as rocks. Now if you want to see how I did that, my video on Barricades really does sort of go into that in a little bit more detail, so I'll put a link to that. And you can also see that doorway that I've put on. Now that's just cereal box cardboard in much the same way that we did with those shipping containers. Now here you'll notice I'm going to put on some tufts of grass. Now there are a couple of tricks I use for this. I'm using these Army Painter woodland tufts. Now obviously this is not a woodland scene, but this green should complement the rest of the colours of this build quite well. So what I like to do with these is, because I've got lots of different sizes in that packet, I'm actually going to vary these up a little bit, and for the most part I'll be cutting these in half, as you'll see very shortly. Now the benefit to cutting these in half, especially with this type of build, as you can see there, it's sliced right down the middle. With that straight edge on there, it actually sits up against the building a little bit nicer, and it does look like that grass is then sort of coming out of that gap between the concrete and the dirt. So you do want to get yourself a pretty good drip of glue when you place these down. Because we're putting them on a textured surface, you want to make sure that there is good contact for that grass to sit onto that texture. So make sure there is a good drip of glue on the bottom of these tufts of grass before you place them down. Give them a bit of a chance to dry, don't overdo it, make sure you put a few on, stand back, have a bit of a look at it, make sure it looks like what you want it to, and as you can see there, those have come up really good. Now you can certainly use cardboard for the base of that building if you want to add those details on the outside as well. Now I did promise a tour of my studio. I use the term very lightly. It is the corner of a room with some cardboard lights, but I am very grateful to have it. I want to give a quick shout out as well to my Patreon supporters, Stefan, John, Phil, and also Nathan from Nate's Miniatures. He has a YouTube channel, so I'll put a link to that down below in the description. Thank you guys. Please remember to subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and leave a comment if you have any feedback or suggestions for the channel. Thanks for your time. Have a good one, guys.